When you do the training at the W3 Schools website that I showed you in the earlier video, you'll acquire a piece of HTML that's named main page, and you'll also acquire page1.htm and page2.htm. I've just expanded on these in this project, and you'll see what I'm looking for you to do is very similar to what I'm doing here, except you'll use some original photos and you'll use an original poem. So let me make some sense of this for you. First of all, take a look at these images here that I've gotten off of the image search on Google. I had picked out a poem about polar bears, a humorous poem by Shel Silverstein. So I picked up some pictures of bears on the web. Notice the little box that's appearing here, the dimensions of this, 300 pixels wide by 225 tall. The second picture, exactly the same dimensions. The third picture, the same dimensions. The fourth picture, because its shape was a little different, I made a little narrower so that its height was about the same as the others. In order to use pictures in this project, you'll probably have to resize some pictures. If you have any problems with that, send me an email. I'll be happy to suggest some solutions for it. It's important that you use pictures in this that are about this dimension so that it doesn't overwhelm your screen. If you make a mistake and just use a picture that's very large, you'll see right away the error of your ways. Another way you could cut the image down to size would be to use the width and the height specifications on the image source tag, which is demonstrated for you on the W3 Schools website. It's not a recommended way to do things, but it will work in this case because we're not really looking here for efficiency. We're simply looking to get a smoothly functioning little set of screens. Now what I'm going to do to show you how this works, I'm going to take a look at main page by just double clicking on it. So what you see coming up here is the beginning of a little suite of 3 screens. Basically what I've done here is to take a poem that I found on the web by Shel Silverstein. It's called Bear in There. I cut it up into 3 pieces. It's not a very long poem, so I cut it up into 3 more or less equal parts of text. In setting this up, the idea is that I've spread that poem across 3 different pages. And just as it indicates here, the only way you'll get to see this poem I've cut up into 3 is to click through these different screens. So let's take a look at the first one. This is the first part of the poem. There's a polar bear in our Frigidaire. He likes it 'cause it's cold in there, with his feet in the meat and his face in the fish and his big hairy paws in the buttery dish. Well, here's a bear looking at you. So you've got this page, but you have to go back to the main page. This is once again your menu screen. Let's go see the second part of the poem. He's nibbling the noodles, he's munching the rice, he's slurping the soda, he's licking the ice. All right, let's see what the third part of the poem says. The last part. And he lets out a roar if you open the door, and it gives me a scare to know he's in there, that polary bear in our Frigidaire. So there you go, an in-your-face picture of the polar bear at this point. And we can go back to the main page. So that's all there really is to it. I'm looking for you to come up using the pattern of the main page and the pages that it links to that you see in the training. Let's take a look now, though, at the code of this. And in fact, by giving you this example, I'm actually giving you an awful lot of a hint on how to do this. If I wanted to see the code that makes this up, at least using Internet Explorer, I could go to View and then Source. Now other browsers also give you this same sort of a capability to see the HTML that's actually being sent down to you from a server. So if I click on this, now I get to see the HTML as the browser got it. And it does something nice for me here. It colors up these tag names here with one color, and the beginning of the tag with a slightly different color, and then this punctuation and some of these words with blue. So what's remaining in black is the text. And here you see a tag that wasn't indicated in the couple of pages of training, this center tag. Center begins centering the text, and the proper way to end that after you've had everything in between centered is to say /center in the pointy brackets. So here you see the main page. It follows very much the main page that you saw in the training. This is the tag for an illustration, a JPEG. Here's a couple of lines of the poem. Notice I've started it with the paragraph and ended it with the paragraph tag. And I've had to put these breaks at the end of every line. Here I've had 2 breaks because I wanted a space in between. You'll probably forget to do this, and you'll see the result on the screen, and then you'll know that you made a mistake. So this is the HTML for the main page. Now if we go down to one of the pages of the poem here, we can do the very same thing. We can look here for view and source, and we can see what we've got. Center, here's the title I put as a heading 1, here's a different image being displayed, and then here's the first couple of lines of the poem. So I just copied and pasted this from the web. In fact, you'll have to watch that if you do that. When you copy from the web, you're going to copy formatting from the web too. The way to get rid of that is to drop what you copy from the web into a very dumb text editor like Notepad, on a PC anyway, and this removes all the formatting. Now if you copy something from the web and you don't do this, you're likely to get a whole lot more in the way of stuff that the web puts out there in the way of HTML than you bargained for. So you might find it even more advantageous simply to take a poem that you find in a book and type up the few lines and put it in rather than copying and pasting, because you won't get very clean text like this if you copy from the web and don't run it through a very simple text editor. But for example, if you attempt to drop stuff that you copy from a web page off into a Word document, you will wind up with a whole bunch of crazy formatting. This is not demonstrated in that training from the W3 Schools site. You'll recognize that this is a link just like the link that got us here from the main page. This is going back to the main page. So we have here the name of the main page. That's the reference where it's going back to. What's in between the pointy brackets here is what's going to get underlined. And following that is anything that I want to see to complete that sentence. The effect here will be to have click here, underscored, that's the hyperlink, and then a space, and then the rest of these words. Take a look at this and you see the effect of that right here at the bottom. Now I'm going to go back here, I'll go to the second part, and you'll see that this is very similar to that first part of the poem. It really is just exactly the same in almost all regards, except the picture is different and the words here are different. But this link is the same because every one of these parts of the poem branch right back to the same main page. And the third part of the poem, if we were to look at the source on this, it follows exactly the same pattern. You're going to learn a couple of things here about HTML. What you're going to have to do is to find your own poem, some poem that you like, of about this length, about 20 lines perhaps, and you'll have to find some related pictures. You'll have to get the pictures into some decent size. If they're not that size already, figure out some way to get them down to the size that you need, and then include them this way. Going back here now to this folder, this is what you need to create. Now, how are you going to get this to me? This is a really interesting proposition. I'd like to have all of these files so that I can run your code and actually see what the website looks like. But I don't want you to have to send me 8 separate files. That would really be kind of burdensome. That's an awful lot of hassle to attach to an email and hassle for me to take and then attempt to put all together. Here's a much better way to do it. If I mark every one of these, what I've done here is to highlight the first one. I'm holding the Shift key down and I highlight the last one. Now I have all of them marked. I put my cursor into that group and with the right mouse button I press and I select Send to Compressed Zipped Folder. When I do this, all of these get squished into one folder and it will take one of the names. It's just kind of a hodgepodge on how it does this. You could rename this. I'm right mouse clicking and rename, and just rename the front part of it something like this: Project 4-1- and your name. So this was done by Hobart Hooper, and this is the file that you send to me, the zipped up file. Now when I receive that, I want you to see what happens here, what I'm going to do with it. If I double click on it, it will show me everything in it. All of these files really are within that one zipped up file. And it normally achieves some degree of compression. If you added all these numbers up, it doesn't seem like this has compressed it very much, but it has compressed it some. JPEG images don't compress very well. HTML will, but they're rather small files. This, when you send it to me, is as efficient as you can make the attachment, and it's really just the one file. Now on a Mac, you'll have to do this a little bit differently. Investigate the commands there, do a little search, and see how you can zip up a bunch of files into one zipped file, and you can send it to me. What you want to do to create these kinds of files here is to use a very simple text editor. I'm going to right mouse click on this and open with Notepad. I want you to see what happens when I do this. Notepad looks something like this. It's not really a word processor, it's just sort of like a typewriter. This is one way to create this code. However, if you wanted to, let's see what happens when we open this with Word. You see, the problem with opening it as an HTML file in Word is that Word tries to be smart and turn itself into an HTML editor. We don't want to do that. It's not going to do a very good job at that, but it really isn't the point of this project to have you do this. So I'm not going to use it that way. If I take this and right mouse click on it and rename it, I can change the suffix to just txt. Now watch what happens. The message will come up. Ordinarily, you change the file extension, you may mess up access to the file because the software that's going to open it looks at that suffix to understand which program should open it up. But in this case, I really do want to do this. I want to make that txt, so that's fine. I want to change it. Now, if I right mouse click and I open with Word, it opens it up just simply as text. It doesn't try to interpret this as HTML. This is one way of using Word to build this code. If you don't have access to Notepad, or you don't want to use it, or you're on a Mac and you don't have an editor that works as simply as Notepad does on a PC, then just rename the file that you're working with txt, or start it that way. Name it txt. When you're all done with it, then you can go and rename it to HTML. And once again, we get that message. The system just wants to make sure I really know what I'm doing by changing that last part of the name. And now, if I wanted to open with, I could open it with Internet Explorer, or I could open it up with Firefox, or with the Opera browser, or with Safari if I had it. Let's just try Firefox at this time. And although it took longer, Firefox opens it exactly the same way. There's a little lesson in that. The same HTML is supposed to present itself in the identical way no matter what browser you're using. Let's try it one more time. Let's try this time Google Chrome. and it's pretty much the same way. It seems to space a little bit differently. And there are even other browsers, Safari and Opera and various others. They will all render this in a fairly similar way. This is just very basic HTML. There's nothing exotic about it, and most browsers will do a perfectly adequate job on this. So that's the extent of Project 1. You're going to build a little collection of screens, 4 of them, with illustrations, and they'll act as you've seen here. Just to review, so test it in your own browser and send me a zipped up file of all of this. That's how you submit your work for this for grading.